All right, so you sent over some YouTube transcripts all about mastering spoken English. Looks like you're really serious about leveling up your skills. I see you've got a couple of episodes from the same channel here, one on shadowing and another about learning from mistakes.
And choosing multiple episodes from the same source, that's smart. It gives us a chance to see how their ideas connect and if they actually hold up under scrutiny.
Yeah, for sure. They both sound incredibly relevant to me, but I have to say, the idea of shadowing is kind of new to me. What is it? How does it help with spoken English?
It's more than just mimicking, you know? The episodes argue that shadowing is about capturing the entire essence of how a native speaker delivers a phrase. So think intonation, rhythm, even those really subtle pauses.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like you're stepping into their shoes vocally. You're trying to become them.
Yeah, and they tie this to neuroscience. They say that by shadowing, your brain is working so hard to try to decode and replicate those nuances and essentially rewiring itself to process and produce English more naturally.
That's so cool. But how do you even begin? Do you just pick any random English audio and start mimicking?
Well, they actually break it down into steps. So first, you find audio that you actually enjoy. It could be podcast, a TED Talk, even a scene from a movie you really like. You know, the key is that you're engaged enough to listen really closely.
Makes sense. If it's something boring, you're probably not going to stick with it. Then what?
Then it's like any workout. You have to warm up. So they suggest doing some vocal exercises to get your mouth ready to produce those English sounds.
So no jumping right into like a Shakespearean monologue then. Good to know.
Right, start slow, maybe with something closer to your current level. And one of their coolest tips is recording yourself while you're shadowing. It's like having a personal speech coach right in your pocket.
Oh, that's brilliant. You can literally hear where you're stumbling and which sounds you need to work on more. But I have to ask, this all sounds pretty basic. Is there more to shadowing than just repeating after someone?
Yeah, they actually have a whole section on advanced shadowing techniques, and this is where it gets interesting because they encourage you to move beyond just words. So try incorporating movement to kind of embody the speaker's energy.
Wait, like moving around while I'm shadowing? That sounds kind of fun.
It is. They also suggest shadowing different accents, which can help train your ear. And even shadowing without a transcript to really push your listening comprehension to the limit.
Wow, that's intense. I can see how those techniques would really elevate your skills. But I have to imagine there are also challenges that come with shadowing, right? I mean, it can't be all smooth sailing.
Oh, for sure. They address that head on. Feeling overwhelmed by the speed. Totally normal, especially when you're starting out. They suggest adjusting the playback speed to a pace that feels comfortable for you.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
I was picturing myself struggling to keep up with a rapid-fire auctioneer.
Oh, no need for that. And they've got solutions for other common challenges too. Losing your place. Break the audio down into smaller chunks. Battling that inner critic that says you sound silly. Practice in private until you feel more confident.
It's like they've anticipated every possible roadblock and provided a detour. But what stood out to me was this thing called lag shadowing. They didn't really explain why it works.
That's where we come in. So lag shadowing, where you intentionally shadow a few words behind the speaker, is so effective because it forces you to try to predict what's coming next, which engages your brain on a much deeper level and makes you a more active listener.
So you're not just passively repeating, you're actively analyzing and anticipating, which ultimately, I guess, helps you understand and speak English more naturally.
Exactly. It's like training your brain to think in English, which is key to achieving fluency. And that actually connects really well with the other episode you sent over about learning from mistakes. They argue that mistakes aren't failures, they're valuable opportunities for growth.
Yeah, that's a crucial mindset shift. I think so many of us are conditioned to fear mistakes, especially in language learning. We forget they're actually so essential for making progress.
It's like they say in the episode, mistakes are simply data points. They help us to see where our understanding is a bit shaky and where we need to focus our efforts more.
I love how they make this comparison. They say mistakes are like fuel for growth. The more we make, and more importantly, the more we learn from them, the more experience we gain.
Right, and it's not just about language learning. This idea of embracing mistakes applies to any area of life where you want to improve, you know?
That's true. Whether it's learning a new skill, starting a business, or even just navigating relationships, the ability to learn from mistakes is so important.
Totally. They also emphasize having a growth mindset. I think a lot of people get stuck in a fixed mindset where they believe their abilities are kind of set in stone. But a growth mindset sees challenges as opportunities to learn and develop, right?
So it's not I'm bad at English, it's I'm learning English. And I'm going to get better with each mistake I make.
Exactly. It's about focusing on the process, not just the outcome. And there's this great quote from Oprah Winfrey that they share in the episode. She says, "Learn from every mistake because every experience, encounter, and particularly your mistakes are there to teach you and force you into being more of who you are."
Wow, that's powerful. It's a good reminder that mistakes are part of becoming our best selves, really. But it's not enough to just think about our mistakes, right? They talk about the importance of taking action.
Oh, absolutely. They really hammer home that point, that reflection without action is useless. So they suggest creating a plan to apply what you've learned from your mistakes and turning those insights into really concrete steps.
It's like creating a roadmap for personal growth.
Yeah.
Using your mistakes as signposts to guide you in the right direction.
I like that. And here's something I found interesting. They even encourage teaching others what we've learned from our mistakes.
I love that. It's like paying it forward. You're helping others avoid those same pitfalls, and it also probably helps solidify your own understanding too.
For sure. And it kind of normalizes making mistakes. Being open about our stumbles creates a much more supportive environment for learning, I think. But they also acknowledge that this isn't always easy, you know? Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to admit when we're wrong.
Totally. A lot of people have this fear of judgment, this worry that people will think less of them if they mess up.
That's so human, right? But they argue that learning requires being vulnerable, being willing to step outside of your comfort zone, to ask for help when you need it, and to be open to feedback, even if it's not always positive.
And when it comes to feedback, they have some really helpful advice. It's not just about passively receiving it, it's about actively seeking it out and using it to actually improve.
Yeah, they suggest asking for specific feedback, focusing on what you can learn from the situation, and most importantly, trying to avoid getting defensive.
That last one's huge. I know I've definitely been guilty of getting defensive when someone points out a mistake I made, but that just totally shuts down the learning process, doesn't it?
For sure. It's all about shifting our perspective and seeing feedback as a gift, even when it's tough to hear. It helps us see things from a different angle and identify any blind spots we might not have noticed on our own.
And those blind spots can sometimes lead to some pretty big mistakes, right?
Yeah.
What I appreciate is they didn't just stop at admit your mistakes and get feedback. They dove deeper, like how to actually extract valuable lessons from your mistakes.
Yeah. It's not enough to just acknowledge that you messed up. You have to understand why it happened so you can avoid doing it again next time.
Right. And they provide some really practical questions to guide that reflection, like what could I have done differently? What assumptions did I make that led to this mistake?
It's about turning oops moments into aha moments, you know,
Yeah.
transforming stumbles into stepping stones.
I love that imagery. It's like each mistake becomes a stepping stone on that path to fluency or whatever goal you're striving for.
Exactly. But they also remind us that just recognizing a mistake is just the first step. You have to actually create a plan to use what you learned, translate those lessons into some kind of concrete action.
It's all about turning knowledge into action, right?
Yeah.
So instead of just saying, I shouldn't have done that, it's about asking, okay, what steps can I take to make sure I don't make that same mistake again?
And remember that idea about teaching others what you learned? Well, they bring that back here too. It's about sharing your experiences to help others avoid making those same mistakes.
I love how all these ideas connect. It's like they've created a whole ecosystem of learning, with mistakes as the fertile ground where growth takes root.
You know, it's really making me think about how I approach learning, like in general. It's not just about language, it's about life, isn't it?
Absolutely. These principles apply to any area where you want to grow and evolve. And that's a theme that comes up again and again in these episodes, the idea of lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning. Do they actually use that phrase specifically?
Not in those exact words, but it's definitely woven throughout both episodes. It's like they're saying that to truly master something, you can't be afraid to jump in, make mistakes, and keep refining your approach.
And that's a powerful message, especially now when things are changing so fast all the time. You can't just rely on what you learned in school. You have to be constantly learning and adapting.
They actually touch on some research from Harvard that shows that learning new things can literally change your brain. Like it can increase gray matter volume in the hippocampus, which is, the area responsible for forming new memories.
Wow. So it's not just about preventing mental decline as we age, it's about actively building those cognitive muscles. And they point out that lifelong learning isn't just about staying sharp mentally, It can also boost your self-esteem, well-being, and even your career prospects.
Right. Employers want to see that you're committed to growth and keeping your skills up to date, but sometimes they can all feel a bit overwhelming, like there's just so much to learn and not enough time.
I get that. They actually acknowledge that even with all the resources available today, it can be hard to prioritize learning in our busy lives.
So what do they suggest? How do we make time for learning when it feels like there's no time for anything?
Well, they encourage us to think about it differently. Instead of seeing learning as something we have to do, what if we saw it as something we get to do?
Oh, I love that. It's like shifting it from a chore to a privilege, a chance to really explore things that interest us.
Exactly. It's about tapping back into that sense of wonder and excitement we all had as kids, discovering the world for the first time.
But as adults, we have bills to pay and deadlines to meet. So how do we realistically fit learning into that?
They suggest setting smaller, more manageable goals, something that you can easily fit into your schedule, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
So instead of I'm going to learn a new language this year, it's more like I'm going to spend 15 minutes each morning practicing with Duolingo.
Yeah, exactly. And they remind us that we don't have to learn the same way we did in school. Some people love structured environments, while others prefer to learn more independently. It's all about finding what works for you and creating a routine that's sustainable and, enjoyable.
It's like creating your own little personalized learning adventure,
Yeah.
choosing the path that suits your individual needs and interests.
Right. And they emphasize that lifelong learning shouldn't be just about passively absorbing information, It's about actually applying that knowledge in the real world.
Yeah, it's about making those connections, seeing how what we learn can impact our lives and the lives of others. But sometimes it can feel like we're making such slow progress.
They talk about that too. They encourage listeners to celebrate their accomplishments along the way, no matter how small.
It's like giving yourself permission to be proud of your efforts, even if you haven't quite reached the top of the mountain yet.
And ultimately, they remind us that lifelong learning isn't about reaching a final destination. It's more about the journey itself, the constant process of growing and evolving and becoming the best versions of ourselves.
That's beautifully said. It means we're never truly done learning, right? There's always more to discover and more to explore. Which brings us back to those YouTube episodes about shadowing and learning from mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Now those techniques fit into this larger framework of lifelong learning.
Exactly. They're providing us with tools and strategies to embark on this lifelong learning journey. But I'm curious, they talk a lot about language learning. Do you think these principles apply to other areas as well?
Absolutely. I think the cool thing about these principles is you can adapt them to any area where you want to grow and learn, whether it's picking up a new hobby or tackling a professional challenge, or even just becoming more mindful in your everyday life. Those same ideas of embracing your mistakes and seeking feedback and really adopting that growth mindset can make a huge difference. Yeah, I totally agree. It's about recognizing that learning is a fundamental part of being human. And it doesn't stop when we graduate or land a certain job, right?
So we've established that these YouTube episodes offer a great framework for lifelong learning. But I'm still curious about some of the specifics. You mentioned they go into some really practical techniques to help you become a more confident English speaker. What exactly are those?
Well, one that really stood out to me is this whole concept of thinking in English.
Thinking in English. I have to admit, I tend to translate everything in my head. Is it actually possible to just switch gears and have your thoughts flow naturally in another language?
The episodes argue that it's not only possible, it's like a game changer for fluency. Instead of mentally juggling translations all the time, you just start forming ideas and expressing yourself directly in English.
That sounds amazing, but to be honest, a bit intimidating, like it's rewiring your brain. How do they even suggest we start doing that?
They recommend starting small. Try narrating your daily activities in English, even if it's just internally at first. So as you're brushing your teeth or making coffee or even walking the dog, create a running commentary in your mind describing what you're doing in English.
So instead of just zoning out during my morning routine, I'm actually actively engaging my brain in English, like turning those mundane tasks into mini language learning sessions.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this constant stream of English in your mind, even when you're not speaking out loud. And they say this kind of mental practice lays the foundation for more fluent and natural spoken English.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about the physical aspect of speaking? Pronunciation, for instance, can be a real hurdle. Do they address that too?
Oh, yeah, they do. They acknowledge that certain sounds can be tricky for English learners, depending on their native language. And while they celebrate the diversity of accents, they also emphasize that mastering those challenging sounds is crucial for clear communication.
It reminds me of that classic example of the "the" sound for Spanish speakers, or like the L and R distinction for Japanese speakers. Those can be real tongue twisters.
For sure. They stress that it's not just about intellectually understanding the sounds, it's about training the muscles in your mouth to produce them correctly.
So it almost becomes a physical exercise, like learning a new dance move for your tongue. I never thought of it that way.
It is. And like any physical skill, it just takes practice and repetition. You're building up that muscle memory.
Okay, so we're thinking in English, we're working on our pronunciation, but what about putting it all together into coherent sentences? Do they have any tips for building vocabulary and actually speaking in, grammatically correct phrases?
Well, they recommend focusing on learning phrases rather than individual words. So instead of just memorizing the word beautiful, you might learn, that's a beautiful sunset, or you have a beautiful smile.
It's like equipping yourself with these little ready-to-use building blocks of language, those chunks that you can pull out in different situations.
Right. And it streamlines your learning, helps you sound more natural, and it avoids that kind of robotic word-by-word delivery that can happen when you're translating in your head.
I'm already feeling more confident just hearing about all these strategies. But what about all those colorful expressions that make English so dynamic? Idioms, for instance. They always kind of intrigue me, but I've always been a little intimidated by them.
The episodes are full of enthusiasm for idioms. They emphasize that these quirky expressions are a fantastic way to sound more like a native speaker and to infuse your English with humor and personality.
I love idioms like break a leg, which of course doesn't mean to actually break your leg, but to wish someone good luck.
Exactly. Or piece of cake, which means something's easy, not a literal piece of cake. But yeah, I understand your hesitation. Using idioms incorrectly can definitely sound a little awkward.
Yeah, that's my fear. It's like walking this tightrope between sounding really authentic and sounding like you're trying way too hard.
Yeah, they get that. They stress how important it is to learn idioms in context and to use them appropriately. Immersing yourself in real English content like movies or TV shows or music is a good way to pick them up naturally.
I'm a big fan of podcasts, and I've noticed that some of them even have transcripts. It's great for following along and catching those idioms and looking up any words you don't know.
That's a great idea. And some podcasts even have exercises or quizzes which can really help with remembering what you've learned.
Speaking of immersion, the episodes also touch on the benefits of living in an English-speaking country.
Yeah, they describe it as like a 247 language program. You're constantly surrounded by English, you're forced to use it in everyday situations, and you're just exposed to all these subtle nuances that you might miss in a classroom.
It's like a language boot camp where you're completely immersed in the culture and you just kind of have to sink or swim. But realistically, packing up and moving to another country isn't an option for everyone. What advice do they give to people who can't just jet off to London or New York?
Well, they say you can create an immersive environment right where you are. It's all about actively seeking out those opportunities to engage with English in your daily life.
Give me some examples. What are some specific things they suggest?
So they recommend things like, finding an English-speaking job or volunteer position, or even hosting travelers through platforms like Couchsurfing or Airbnb. Even something as simple as switching the language settings on your phone or computer to English can make a difference.
It's like you're hacking your environment to make it more English-friendly, turning everyday interactions into mini language lessons.
Yeah, exactly. And they also emphasize finding a balance between online learning and actual real life interaction. Apps and websites are great for vocabulary and grammar drills, but there's really no substitute for practicing with real people.
Right. There's that spontaneity and unpredictability to real conversations that you just don't get with a computer program.
For sure. They suggest joining conversation groups or finding a language partner, or even just striking up conversations with people at a coffee shop or in a store or a museum.
It's about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, using your English in real-world situations, and really embracing those opportunities for authentic communication.
And here's a tip that might surprise you. They recommend practicing in front of a mirror.
A mirror. Like talking to myself. That sounds a little unusual.
I know, it might feel a little silly at first, but they say it's actually super effective. Seeing yourself speak allows you to observe your facial expressions, body language, even your mouth movements, which can help you pinpoint areas to work on.
Oh, I see. It's like having your own personal speech coach, giving you instant feedback on your delivery.
Exactly. You can even practice different scenarios, like giving a presentation or ordering food at a restaurant or having a casual chat with a friend. The mirror just becomes this safe space to experiment and build up your confidence.
I'm starting to see the value in that now. But with all of these strategies, I'm sensing a recurring theme. Consistency.
You're right. The episodes really hammer home that point, that it's not about cramming in hours of practice all at once. It's about making English a regular part of your life, even if it's just for a few minutes every day.
It's about building those small, consistent habits that lead to big progress over time. Like a snowball rolling down a hill, gathering more and more momentum.
Oh, I like that. That's a great analogy. But they also remind us that, language learning isn't a straight line. There will be ups and downs, times when you feel super fluent and times when you feel really frustrated.
Yeah, it's like anything worthwhile in life, right?
Hey.
There will be challenges and plateaus and even setbacks. But it's so important to just keep going and be kind to yourself throughout the process.
They offer some great advice on staying motivated. Things like setting realistic goals and celebrating those little wins along the way, and connecting with other learners for support and encouragement.
Yeah, that sense of community is so important. Knowing that you're not alone in this. And it really ties back to one of their core messages, which is that making mistakes isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're learning and growing.
Absolutely. They want us to embrace those mistakes, analyze them, figure out what we can learn from them, and use that knowledge to keep moving forward.
Wow, I'm feeling so inspired after this deep dive. It's like they've given us a toolbox filled with practical strategies and a powerful mindset shift that we can use not just for language learning, but really for any area of life where we want to improve.
Me too. And it's a good reminder that learning isn't just about acquiring knowledge or skills. It's about expanding our horizons and connecting with others and just becoming more well-rounded human beings, right?
This has been such a fantastic deep dive. We've uncovered so many valuable insights, not just about shadowing and learning from mistakes, but really about the very nature of learning. What are your biggest takeaways?
For me, it's that reminder that learning is an active choice we make every day. It's about staying curious and embracing challenges and finding that joy in the process of discovering something new.
I couldn't agree more. And it's empowering to realize that we have the power to shape our own learning journeys. We can choose the paths we want to explore and create lives that are full of purpose and continuous growth.
And the best part is that journey never really ends. There's always something new to learn, to explore, to become.
So what are you waiting for? Grab those hiking boots and head out on your own learning adventure. And remember, we're here to cheer you on every step of the way.
Happy learning, everyone.